Hello, welcome. If you're seeing this, you're watching YouTube. I'm Joe. That's Alex over there. I'm going to explain very briefly to the people who are watching the video what we are doing now. If you are seeing this, you are watching a new channel, Tifo Podcast. So briefly, the reason for this, as some of you will know, the podcast videos used to appear on the main channel. They don't anymore, and the slightly cynical and some would say irritating reason that they don't is because it affects one particular stat in the analytics in the back end of our YouTube channel, which is the watch time stat, which we are informed by various people that we work with is very important. And it might surprise you, or it might not, to learn that Tifo Football's watch time analytics are excellent. And when we upload hour-long videos to the channel, obviously people either don't watch all of them, or they watch the first 5 minutes, decide they're not interested, or they watch it in bits, and that affects the watch time analytics. And it brings it down by, I don't know, about 20%, I think it was.
It's a considerable factor, yeah.
So for a while, we went off video. It's a bit of a pain to edit these anyway, and we were audio only. But now we're back. The reason being, we are hoping to bring in some guests who you might be interested to look at over the summer and beyond. So
handsome people.
Handsome people.
More handsome than us.
More handsome than, well, you know. But no promises as to guests themselves. But anyway, we're back now. So if you are here, please give us a subscribe. That'd be useful. Doesn't really matter that much, but
you're so professional. If you subscribe, maybe whatever.
I don't care really.
Tell your friends.
Whatever. It's fine.
Just stuff.
If you want to watch the videos, we'll be here. And if you want to predominantly listen, you can do so via Audio Boom, or iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, or pretty much anywhere that you would download your podcasts from. Spotify also now. We are available on all streaming and listening services, I think. All of the important ones anyway. But yeah, if you are a listener and you see that we had David Beckham on, which we don't, but we might do in the future, and you want to watch it, come here and watch it here. That's all. Today, also, I should say, because it's the first one back, we're doing a Q&A, which we do sometimes, Alex and I, maybe once every few months, usually when we can't think of anything else to talk about, or in a week like this, for example, where we've covered pretty much every Premier League team. The two that we would like to revisit, or maybe four, are all featuring in European finals, and we're not going to do that. Next week, we'll have another episode, which I'll be talking to Seb, and I'm looking forward to that one, actually. I'm doing it tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about fans having to travel to Azerbaijan, for example, to the Europa League final, and the travelling aspect of finals. That's going to be exciting. That will be next week, when is the Europa League final? Is that at the weekend?
I don't know.
Well, it's a good job this is just the YouTube bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to tell them. Well, whenever we do Q&As, we tend to put out a community post on the Tifo Football YouTube channel. If this channel grows in the future, we might do it here, but if you ever want to ask us questions, that's the best place to go. Or tweet Alex at Alex...
Don't tweet me.
Something. I don't know what his Twitter is. Anyway, today, we're doing our Q&A. We've got our questions picked out. We also have a handful of questions from Tifo Football YouTube channel members, which you could become one of those people if you want to. The reason that there's about half of these are from members is because one of the cool positives of being a member is that we definitely answer your questions when you ask them. And one of the cool things for us is that the people who are members tend to ask really good questions.
Wednesday, the 29th of May.
So that's halfway through.
Not even over a weekend.
No.
That's really incredibly awkward.
Yeah, and it's in Baku, isn't it?
It is in Baku,
and
yes.
We won't do it here, but I'm excited to talk to Seb about it because I read that...
to there and Baku again.
The reason that there's only 6,000 seats given to Arsenal and Chelsea fans, even though the stadium
it's like 80,000 capacity. Yeah,
but the reason is because the airports can't handle more people coming in at once than 12,000, plus however many corporate seats they have.
Yeah.
So it's about the city building and structures also. How exciting.
Can't wait for this podcast.
It is going to be good. Anyway, that's it. That's your video intro thing. We're going to start now. Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast. I'm Joe Devine, your host, and I'm joined today by Alex Stewart.
Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Fine.
Quick note, we are now available on YouTube again. The search for Tifo Podcast, the channel, and there'll be videos of the channels here. So if we have guests that you would like to look at in the future, you will be able to look at them and us there, which is very exciting, isn't it?
Hugely.
Anyway, today, to celebrate that and the fact that we've reached the end of the season and we don't have too many teams left to investigate from the Premier League, we're doing a Q&A. So we put out a YouTube community post last week, asked our followers, members for questions, and we have a list of them here. So we picked out the ones that we thought would be easiest to answer and that we'd have to put the least amount of work into. And we've got them here. So we're going to try and get through all of them. And without further ado, Alex, the first one is from Benjamin Herlock. Will you please do a Football Manager series over the summer?
No.
Yes, okay. And the reason is we're too busy.
The reason is that they're incredibly time consuming.
Takes too long.
Yeah, way too long.
But you have done one before.
Yeah.
Well, you've done several.
I've done several.
But the really good one is...
On the Set Pieces.
Yes, which is a website.
Yes.
Which used to be edited by...
Ian McIntosh, and was then edited by Matt Stanger, who's now at Joe, and I believe is currently edited by Greg Lee.
Okay.
So yeah, on the Set Pieces where I did a kind of Moneyball thing with Bristol City.
It was good, that.
It was all right.
I read it. I really enjoyed it. It became one of those things that I was actually excited to read the next installment of.
Really?
I was there at the time when they were being published. There was something weirdly exciting about it. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was like a sped up football season. Who was that great young player who, I can't remember if he was already at Bristol or if you bought him in, but became the sort of crux of the team.
Well, Luke Freeman was the guy.
It was Luke Freeman.
Yeah, he was already there.
And he became really good.
He became really good.
You did eventually sell him, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
Because there was no compassion when it came to retaining players.
Right, yeah.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's a set of rules at the beginning of the first episode, which I think recap.
You did it through Moneyball.
Yeah, so
what sort of set of rules you were
kind of there were two sets of rules that I sort of borrowed and adapted from Soccernomics and the numbers game, and to do with transfers. And it wasn't kind of like hyper Moneyball. I didn't get so deep into the stats because I really didn't have time. I ran it for 10 seasons, which, as you can imagine, just playing 10 seasons takes a long time, and then writing about it and making a note of everything.
Sure.
But it sort of is a basic guide to how not to get suckered into spending lots of money unnecessarily.
And I believe, well, let's not give away any spoilers.
Let's not give it away, but it went all right.
You did quite well, didn't you?
Yes, reasonably well.
Yeah. And we will leave a link to in the description of this, the video or the podcast. If anyone wants to go and read those, I would highly encourage you do so. They make for an entertaining and oddly compelling, even though they shouldn't be. Nothing about it says you'll want to keep reading this.
No.
And I would understand that if you're listening and thinking that sounds shit. It really does. But no, weirdly it's very good. So Benjamin Herlock, thank you for that question, and I hope that will sate your interest. A question from JM. England has two incredibly talented young right-backs in Trent Alexander-Arnold and Aaron Wan-Bissaka. It seems a shame to waste either one of them. Can you see any way of both fitting into the England squad in the future, possibly moving Alexander-Arnold into central midfield, or by converting Wan-Bissaka into a centre-half?
Yes, this is a good question, and this it always seems like there are conundrums within.
I was trying to think of more.
Well, I mean,
good historical examples where one great player has missed out because there's been another great player.
The obvious example is trying to balance Gerrard, Lampard, and Scholes in the same midfield.
And also, what about also Leighton Baines behind Ashley Cole?
Yes,
another time he would have been an England starter.
Baines. Absolutely. I think fullback is particularly one of those interesting positions to ask that question because obviously modern fullbacks are extremely attacking, and in some instances and in some kind of systems particularly play almost as wingers. So, covered by a defensive midfielder dropping back to create a kind of back three, and the fullbacks bomb forwards.
And with Trent Alexander-Arnold, often he plays behind Salah, right?
Yes, exactly. So, and Liverpool's midfield is reasonably narrow. And that's because he provides width. He has the engine to get up and down that flank. He can facilitate both attack and defence. If England played in a kind of classic 4-4-2, then you could easily see Alexander-Arnold as a right midfielder with Wan-Bissaka behind him. I think the sense of converting Wan-Bissaka into a centre-half probably comes from the way that England played during the World Cup, with Kyle Walker playing as the right-sided centre-back of three.
Would that work?
To be honest, it's really difficult to answer, because some people would suggest that the Kyle Walker experiment didn't really work during the World Cup. I think there were definitely positives from it, and you could see why it was being done. Wan-Bissaka would be the more appropriate of the two players to do that. But then to mention another Liverpool player, Joe Gomez, who plays both as a centre-back and can play as a right back, would be a more natural fit for that position. I think sometimes really good players just miss out, and it's not. I can't see moving Trent Alexander-Arnold into central midfield. I think for two reasons. Firstly, he's not played there. It seems odd to shoehorn him in that way, but also England do have a lot of good, talented central midfielders trying to come through, and you look at people like, attacking central midfielders like James Maddison not being able to get into the squad because there's just a surfeit of guys that can play there. So I think you need to be very careful not to say, well, we pick our 11 best footballers and then try and fit them into a system. I think the difficulty of international management is balancing a number of available good players with a system that works and retains integrity throughout an international tournament. I would rather have Alexander-Arnold as a starting right back or right wing back with a really, really good backup on the bench than try and shoehorn them into a system where it might not work.
I have to say, I think that one of my favourite moments of the season, and it's probably obvious what I'm going to say now, is the Liverpool game against Barcelona, where Trent Alexander-Arnold
the fake corner
does
not fake, but
the double fake corner, I suppose, or the double feint.
It's brilliant.
I think that's amazing.
Absolutely brilliant.
And I loved it.
And it was entirely planned.
Well, it was planned in the sense that because afterwards Klopp said that specific move wasn't planned, but that his what was planned was he told them to be unpredictable and take risks. And if you're going to win 4-0, you're going to have to do things that they aren't expecting.
But they'd noticed that Barcelona often got kind of sloppy immediately after conceding a set piece, because they would spend more time arguing the decision than they would kind of immediately falling back and picking up their markers. So there was an opportunity there. He's an extraordinary footballer. And
the plus signs are, if anyone noticed that, it was the players, because Klopp didn't tell him to do it. So if he noticed that, and how old is he? Is he a teenager still, or is he in his early 20s now?
He's at young, most right? 21.
I'm afraid of calling people young now because of the last week's episode. We talked about West Ham and the left back whose name I've forgotten.
Ben Chilwell.
No.
No. Oh God. What's his name? Yes, I know who you mean.
It begins with a C.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
God damn it. Anyway, he's young. Also, I keep seeing people leaving YouTube comments and various tweets about everyone calling Jesse Lingard young. And Jesse Lingard is 26, 27 years old. Yeah. Yes, but no.
Aaron Cresswell.
Trent Alexander-Arnold is young. We know that.
Yes.
We know that. Okay. Wan-Bissaka as well is attracting a lot of attention. There are talks that he might be moving somewhere this summer. Presumably, you can see him fitting into one of the Premier League's big teams.
Oh, for sure, yes, and also with his age, the ability that he's shown at this age in a, I think sometimes, like Roy Hodgson has done a really, really good job at Crystal Palace, and Hodgson is a particularly sound defensive coach, even if Palace aren't necessarily the most sound team defensively. That's just personnel. So for him to work under a coach as astute as Hodgson and to be able to kind of balance defensive responsibilities with attacking instinct, I think that sort of sets him up to go on and be a really, really top-class right-back for quite some time.
Papagendo, I think might be my favourite name of the day, Papagendo, says, is Eddie Howe overrated?
Well, okay, really difficult question that.
It depends who's rating him.
It depends what you mean by overrated. My inference from Papagendo's question is the sense that, you know...
Love that name.
Okay, Papagendo. Sounds like a shit board game, doesn't it?
It sounds to me like a what do they call a Jedi?
Oh, yeah. Okay,
You know?
no, it could be that.
Papagendo with the purple. I can't do pop cultural references. Please continue.
Right. So I think what Papagendo means is this sense that Howe was kind of lauded as being the best young English manager, a potential successor in the England job himself.
And cited for all the big six clubs, right?
And cited for all the big six clubs. And yet, you know, Bournemouth have, in the Premier League, they kind of went up. Obviously, when they were their first season of promotion, they finished 16th and they finished 9th, but there's been a regression now and it's 12th, 14th. So overrated in the sense of, yes, he's good, but has he really moved Bournemouth on? Well, I think Bournemouth have developed a bit this season. I think if you look at the performances that he's managed to coax out of people like Ryan Fraser, Callum Wilson, and, you know, that Bournemouth team is still not a side that's bursting with high quality players. So I think it's rating a manager is always relative to the players that they have at their disposal, the system that they're trying to play. And I think what Howe has done is he's achieved stability. He's made Bournemouth very much a kind of staple now of the Premier League after 4 seasons. They are still always going to be slightly in danger of being sucked into a relegation battle, but they seem to have enough about them not to. I think they were impeded this season as well by a long-term injury to Lewis Cook, who is one of the most promising young English central midfielders in the league. So I think it's unfair to say he's overrated. I think it would be an interesting test to see him move up. I don't think he should jump to a top 6 club as his first move after Bournemouth. I think staging somewhere in between those two things, somewhere where he's got more resources, where he's got a slightly higher caliber of player.
Where is that?
Well, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because the Premier League now it's so sort of fat around the middle. It's quite hard to distinguish. You know, and we talk about that second tranche of clubs, which includes Leicester. Well, they're not going to get rid of Brendan Rodgers within the next season or so. Watford look very happy with Javi Gracia. Then you've got Wolves, and he's not going to go anywhere either. Everton, maybe, but then Everton sort of always seems like a kind of...
And they spent quite a lot of money on Marco Silva as well, so the idea they were going to lose him soon.
Yeah. So it's difficult to see. I mean, I think someone like Howe would be very interesting to see him possibly, I don't know, take a couple of seasons in the Bundesliga, for example, and work with young players over there, learn more about the technicalities of how to fit in with a kind of I think German football has a more intelligent system of club running than English football often has. I can't see him doing that, incidentally. It's, you know,
it would be great though.
Well, it would be great. Do
you know what I learnt today?
What?
I learnt today that and this is slightly less interesting due to the fact that this was in 2009. I don't know how different it is now. I'm reading quite a long PDF report at the moment. And in 2009, there were 6 million registered footballers in Germany, which is 6 times the number of registered footballers in England, Italy, France. I think Spain is slightly more, around the 2 million mark, but twice as many as the second placed country. I just wondered why that was. I thought maybe it might be something as simple as they have a different structure which requires players to register at a lower level, or they've got a lot more footballers.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think something that differentiates England from most of the rest of Europe is the cost of doing coaching badges. And I think it's a lot it's a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible to learn how to coach within the UEFA system outside of the UK. And therefore, if you have more qualified coaches, it's probably easier to proliferate a lower league system at a higher standard, and therefore have more players who are interested in registering for that because they're learning lots more. And I don't know, that's speculative, but
it's all speculative.
It's all speculative.
Taha Mama, what are the key tactical differences between international and club football?
Yes, that is a big and tricky question. I think an easier way to answer it is to say that what tactical differences exist are a result of the constraints of international football. This is something that Jonathan Wilson's written about quite a lot.
Because, apologies for interjecting, but otherwise would the question not be what are the tactical differences between league and cup structured football?
Yeah, because international football is, generally speaking, following a kind of cup system, even if it's something like the UEFA Nations League or qualifying for the Euros or the World Cup, because of the bunching of fixtures and then the gap between them, even though those are leagues in the sense of a small kind of number of teams that all play against each other home and away, it feels like a cup competition because each fixture matters and because there's gaps between them. Because of that, coaches therefore have much less time to work on comprehensive systems of play. And I think that the biggest single difference, therefore, is that a lot of international teams will be based on defensive solidity because it's easier to coach defense than attack, and on having a star player or two through whom most of the stuff is fed. Now, whether that's an attacking midfielder or a striker or whatever, but you play to your strengths, you try and keep things solid at the back. And it's simply a result of the fact that a coach will only have a finite number of games or finite number of days, in which to prepare for games. So I think what that means is that you tend not to see the more overtly complex tactical systems in international football that you see in league football. So obviously there are outliers to this, like when Spain were so dominant, they were playing a particular style of football which was very resonant in terms of how Barcelona played at the time. However, that's because, as you were making hand gestures, right, they had so many players from Barcelona and also, a very high caliber of player from Real Madrid who basically filled most of the rest of that squad with one or two from here and there.
I think there was one. I mean, I remember one of those, it might have been the World Cup or the Euros, 2010 or 2012, 2008 was it? Where there was one player who wasn't in one of those two teams.
Right. So, they're obviously in those unusual instances, it's a lot easier. And there's some interesting research on rugby that was done by a guy called Ben Darwin, who was an international prop for Australia and retired with a neck injury, who showed that in rugby, cohesion, particularly positional cohesion, is one of the single greatest indicators of success in tournaments. So if you have particular pairings like a scrum half and a fly half, or two locks or whatever who play together at club level and then play together at international level, that team is more likely to do well. And if you have the same core group of players who go through whole international tournament cycles, you're more likely to do well. So if you're building an international team essentially out of a club and then adding on a few things, it's going to be a lot easier for you because those players are used to playing together, they understand one another, and it's really hard to build that in very, very short periods of time. I think
Tottenham?
Well,
with the England team, I mean?
Tottenham with the England team, because they're probably the team that has the greatest number of English players who are Liverpool have got Henderson, Milner, Trent Alexander-Arnold, probably Joe Gomez in a season or two, and that's that. Spurs have obviously got a number with Harry Kane, Dele Alli, Trippier, Danny Rose, etc., Eric Dyer. Yeah, so I think that does make sense. I think that's one of the reasons why England managers, for example, worry about the number of foreign imports into the Premier League, it's partly because if you don't have large numbers of English players playing together for the same team, you then get a really, really fractured group who come into a training camp. In some instances, actually, sometimes they may not even like each other very much, because domestic rivalries and so on. But you're going to struggle to impose a system. I think that the thing with international football is you keep it simple. You try and pick as many players from the same side as you possibly can, and you don't overcomplicate because you just don't have time.
Kagaru, in a situation where on the pitch leadership is weak and player motivation is limited, do you think it would make sense to import a leader into a club, or would it be more appropriate to groom one of the existing players into a more leadership-orientated role? Or oriented. I never know how to say that word. I like to say orientated.
Yeah.
Is that wrong?
I don't know.
Well, anyway, Kagaru's question.
Kagaru's question's a really good one, because I think, there are previous examples of, an obvious example would be someone like Roy Keane at United, who was brought in because he was a particular style of player, and I think Ferguson identified quite early on from the way, because I think Keane was captaining Nottingham Forest when he was purchased, or had done.
I don't know.
There was definitely a sense
he was very young.
He was very young, but I think he was identified as somebody who would grow into this role, if not be that already. So I think it's really crucial, and we were talking before about a book called The Captain's Club, which I think is by Sam Wallace, something like that. And it talks about the importance to kind of dynastic sports franchises that dominate a particular sport for a particular period of time, of having a captain who isn't necessarily the best player, isn't necessarily the star or the...
Simon Wadsworth.
The Captain Club.
Oh, no, that's a different book. The Captain's Club, Men Who Led United, that book is.
No.
Never
It's
mind.
not that one.
Sorry.
So, for example, if you look at the Barcelona team that was so dominant, then the captain was Puyol. Now, Puyol was not the most creative player. He wasn't the biggest goal scorer. In many regards, he wasn't the best player at all.
He had the most wonderful hair.
But he probably wasn't even the most kind of cultured defender. But he embodied something about that club and elevated everybody else by the way he approached things. So leadership is really, really important. I think to look at Kagaru's question, I think you have to accept that bringing somebody in to be a leader who is an existing leader elsewhere is probably not the best way of doing it. I think if you look at the players who have been consistently strong leaders, they have grown into that role within the club, by and large.
There are pros and cons, aren't there? And let's take it back to Eddie Howe, because we had this conversation once before about Eddie Howe, who played at Bournemouth and then became the coach.
Yes.
Right? And we wondered, when we discussed this last time, whether that would have been easier because he knew the players, he understood them, and he had positive relationships, or whether that would have been harder to shift or transition the dynamic that he already had with those players into a different one, whereby he was the leader and they were the followers. And I think that's difficult too, right?
Yeah, but a manager is not a leader in the same way that this question is posing.
Because even before a player is a captain, for example, say Roy Keane had come through the youth system at Man United, people would have already been inspired by him and respected him before he was officially made the captain. That's what you mean?
That's what I'm saying. And I would also argue that you would... So if you look at that kind of group of United players, for example, Gary Neville is a leader. Nicky Butt kind of is a leader. Roy Keane definitely is. David Beckham isn't.
Paul Scholes is by example, maybe.
Well, and Beckham too, but they're not the sort of players that are... if I think about leaders in the Premier League era, I'm thinking of people like Tony Adams. I'm thinking of like Patrick Vieira.
But what about
Roy
David
Keane.
Beckham for the England team, though?
Again, by example.
Yeah.
I'm not underrating Beckham's achievements as an England player, because I think he absolutely yanked that team along sometimes, but it wasn't in the same way. I think he was somebody who was able to seize individual moments, individual opportunities to do something extraordinary and propel the team to a result by that. But I don't think he was a leader in the same way as a Tony Adams or a Patrick Vieira or a Roy Keane. And they were players who matured into that role within that club. So I think what you need to be doing is looking at your crop of players who are coming through, and you want to look at, is there somebody who stands out through their work ethic, through their commitment to certain things, through upholding the values that you have as a club.
Their understanding of tactics and their ability to communicate that on the pitch?
I think that's helpful, but to me that's secondary. Because I think, for example, if you look at defenders are quite often this sort of, whether it's Tony Adams, John Terry even. I don't like John Terry as a human being, but there's no doubt he was an extraordinarily effective leader of Chelsea. I don't think he has to understand the tactics necessarily beyond what the defence is supposed to be doing in the transition. Not in the same way that, for example, a Frank Lampard would have to understand the tactics. His job is to rally people, to lead by example, and to provide a kind of almost a soul to that team on the pitch, and to embody the values of that side. And
a representative as well, so that other players would feel that there is a buffer between them and the coach, there is a buffer between them and the fans, there is a buffer between them and the media, and that someone's got their back.
Yes, I think that's really important. I think that's increasingly important, and I think that's why if you look at some teams, like for example France in the World Cup, they're obvious leaders in that squad, and Pogba, the people who question Pogba's attitude generally as a human being, not as a Manchester United player, need to watch the speech that he gave during halftime of the World Cup final. That is a leader. There's absolutely no question about that. He is eloquent, inspiring, like he brings people together. It's a phenomenal thing. I think a newer generation of players maybe are less sort of assertively leading in the way that a Puyol or a Terry or an Adams did, and more leading by sort of fostering a sense of collaboration and communication. And
I always think about this scene in The Wire, in HBO's The Wire, which I'm sure many people listening have seen. It's a wonderful television program. There's I think it's in series 3 or 4 maybe, and there's a particular character who's running for mayor of Baltimore, and he is white, and the joke within the show is that if you want to run for the mayor of Baltimore, you have to be black, otherwise you're not going to be elected. And his campaign strategist says to him, because he has a very sharp tongue, and he's at the time before he's running, he's head of the council, I think, so it's his job to interview the police commissioner and make headlines in a way. He has a very sharp tongue and he's very good at making headlines, and his campaign strategist says to him, it's not just about making them look silly, it's about making everyone in the room feel like they want to go with you or they want to be inspired by you. And this is a theme that certainly pops up in politics. It's one of the things that a criticism that is levied at Jeremy Corbyn as a good example of British politics, someone who politically and certainly in terms of policies people might broadly agree with for the most part, but isn't necessarily someone who you watch and makes you, they don't make you want to go with them.
Yeah.
You could level that claim at pretty much anyone in British politics, by the way. That's not an insult at Jeremy Corbyn, it's just an example. Maybe this is the same thing here. There are examples of players that we could think of in Premier League teams who might be quick to sort of crack the whip at other players, or might be quick to criticise other clubs, but unless they have something about them, as you say, with John Terry to those other Chelsea players, there's something about him that makes them want to go with him, rather than just do what he says because they're afraid of him or they like him.
And I think that's a really, really fascinating point, because I think if you look at, two of the kind of most acerbic pundits around at the moment are Souness and Keane, and they're constantly bewailing modern footballers and the attitude of this guy, and this guy's an Instagrammer, and this guy's got stupid haircuts and blah blah blah. And they were both extremely dominant leaders, and I think it's quite easy in some instances to forget, because Souness has become such a grumpy parody subsequently, what a extraordinarily good footballer he was, even if he was a bit thuggish at times. I think they would underestimate their own ability to bring everyone else with them. And I think they would probably see a lot more of what they did as leaders as being down to being combative and assertive and angry. And I think they're wrong about that. I think they probably did inspire people to go with them in a way that they might not have seen. And I think there's now, real leadership, like the Pogba example I gave earlier, is softer. It's not, shoving somebody up against a wall and saying, you are going to make that tackle next time. It's about inspiring people and bringing them with you. And the best leaders are able to do that. Now there's a transition, and this is a thing that has been commented on by others. The people who talk about football externally, pundits, as who are former players, have not been party to this transition in the same sort of way. And some older managers have not been able to bridge that transition either. It's interesting that someone like Didier Deschamps clearly has, because of the way he managed the France squad. So, and a lot of successful managers now are of a younger generation. They are more connected. They are more, someone like Jurgen Klopp is clearly more of a kind of a father figure. I'm sure Jurgen Klopp can put a rocket up someone's arse if it's required.
But they don't want him to, not because they don't want to deal with the hassle, but because they don't want to disappoint their dad.
They don't want to disappoint their dad, and when their dad gives them a hug and says, good boy,
James Milner cries.
Right, that's what he engenders. What
about Matthias de Ligt, for example, or Matthias de Ligt? If you're in that squad, if you're Daley Blind, you're playing next to him, are you looking at him as a 19-year-old and you're thinking, Christ, this guy's really good. He loves it. He's Ajax through and through, and he keeps scoring us goals. I'm inspired by that.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening there?
I think so. And Eric Ten Hag gave a really long and detailed interview recently where he was saying that it's actually a very interesting example, that Blint is kind of Ten Hag's tactical proxy on the pitch.
Right.
Because he's very, very smart player. Blint's obviously played as a left back, a left wing back, a centre back, defensive midfielder.
It's why Van Gaal hired him at United, right?
Exactly.
It didn't quite work out with personalities on the team sheet, maybe, but
it should have done.
That was the idea.
He's a very smart guy, and obviously his dad's a coach as well.
He's incredibly attractive.
He's really, really handsome. Yeah. So in that sense, there is a clear division. If Ten Hag wants to get tactical instructions onto the pitch to players, he tells Daley Blind. De Ligt is there to inspire, to motivate, and to be an example of everything that Ajax stands for. And so that division to me makes perfect sense. And I'd say that Ajax have a number of players who, because of the nature of that club and the way that players get brought through, they all get that. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ajax almost don't need a captain.
They're emblems.
Because they all kind of buy into what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Donny van de Beek, Frankie de Jong, these are all people who kind of get it and get the system. And De Ligt just happens to be maybe the most eloquent of them.
The tallest.
Or the tallest. Mm. I think he is the tallest.
Yeah. We could talk about this all day, I think.
It's a very good question.
It is. Thank you to Kagaru for that. Bromo18, could you do podcasts on teams that aren't in the Premier League? Well, Bromo, we could. I don't think they would be as good that's assuming that you think the ones we do at the moment are good. The reason being, Seb Stafford-Bloor, who is usually here with us, is an accredited football journalist in the UK, and that means that every week he's at maybe 2 games. He gets around the country, doesn't he? But they mostly happen to be in the Premier League. Some of them will be in the Championship, occasionally lower down in the English tiers than that, but tends not to be abroad. He will sometimes go to European games, but it's not his focus. Alex obviously will do tactics on teams overseas, but what that tends to require is slightly more research beforehand, because we just don't watch the European League as much as we watch the Premier League.
Time.
Yeah, there's so much football to do, and my worry is that if we stray too far from what we are comfortable talking about, we will get to a point where we are either killing ourselves with the research to try and make it interesting, not acknowledging that there are other people out there better placed to do that.
Yeah.
It's just not, we're just not those people. We would love to, and maybe in the future as Tifo expands, we can bring in people who can do that with us. At the moment, it's not really possible. So now and then we might try to do that if it's a team that we feel particularly confident with. But that is the explanation as to why we don't. Do you want to add anything to that, or is that fine?
No, I think that's the case. I think that there are there are plenty of people out there who are writing brilliant stuff on MLS, Liga MX, Liga, whatever it is, and we're definitely not the kind of company that wades into a particular arena and claims it as our own, like we've always been doing it, when actually we haven't.
Yeah. In fact, if you are English speaking only, there is at least one excellent journalist in every other country. So, for example, if you want to know more about Ajax, go and read what Elko Born writes.
Right.
If you want to know more about France, go and read Fill in the Gap for me, Alex.
Oh, France.
Alex Netherton used to write a lot about France, but I don't think he does anymore.
No.
The point is there'll be some.
There are plenty of people.
What about Philippe Auclair? Does he write about French teams still?
He does. Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Someone will. The point is there'll be an excellent person out there who will.
I mean,
all you have to do is go and find them.
Twitter is, I mean, I hate Twitter, but it's a great resource for that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And you will be able to find people, and you quite quickly work out whether somebody is interested in the sorts of things you're interested in, and has not a take that's the same as yours necessarily, but has a kind of a level of detail or a focus on what you're interested in. So,
and at times I'm already out of my comfort zone, and we haven't even left the country. So I think that's why. Replybait asks, will Manchester City dominate the EPL like Bayern, Juve, and PSG for the next few years? No.
Really tricky question.
This year,
they didn't dominate. No, not and
they won by a point, didn't they?
They won by a point. The margin of victory was not as big as the year before. I believe I'm right in saying, and I can't take any credit for this stat if indeed I have remembered it correctly, that this is the first time ever that each of Europe's top 5 leagues has seen the championship retained by the team who won it last season.
Right, that's interesting.
I think I'm fairly confident that that's true.
But then we're also in the same season with the first time ever where 4 teams representing one nation fill the 2 European finals.
Yeah.
Which is, again, another reason why I feel like you can't say that Manchester City have dominated English football.
No.
They haven't dominated the Premier League this year because it was unclear until the last day who was going to win. As you said, the margin was slightly bigger last year. If you're asking, are Manchester City going to win the Premier League next year? It's a very possible yes. But if I don't think it would be fair to say that they will dominate again. Liverpool,
No.
So I don't feel like Liverpool are going to drop off.
So if you look at Bayern in Germany, for example, they didn't dominate the league this year either. They won their 7th, 8th Bundesliga in a row, sure, but Dortmund pushed them really hard, and there are other sides that maybe aren't going to unsettle them. But I think there's a difference between winning and domination. I don't think that you'll see Manchester City necessarily win 6, 7, 8 titles in a row the way that Juventus or Bayern have done.
Mm-hmm.
I think partly that's because there is a greater degree of financial competitiveness in the English leagues. So I think there's less of a gap between Manchester City and the other sides in terms of financial spend. I think the area where really City and Liverpool particularly have set themselves apart is the intelligence with which they do everything, whether that's backroom staff, whether that's media, whether that's recruitment, stats, sports science. They are ahead of the curve in that regard. And so it's not just about being able to throw money around.
Also, if you think about it, there aren't that many more points to win. I mean, Liverpool and Man City both
Liverpool
scored
only
90
lost
over 90
once
points
this season.
Yeah, so when you look at it that way, there's an awful lot of room for the teams beneath those two to improve.
Yeah,
and there isn't much room for Manchester City or Liverpool to improve in terms of points earned.
I guess what Replybait probably means is, will there now be a succession of Manchester City title wins that'll spread off into the next 5-10 years?
But if there are, it certainly won't be in the same manner that PSG win Liga.
Exactly. Yes.
Even if Man City win 5 in a row and PSG win the same years, it won't be the same thing.
It won't be the same thing.
No. So, no. I think that's a no. I think it's a hard no, Replybait. Joseph, is the away goals rule outdated? I like this one.
Well, maybe you want to answer it then.
I can't. I just like the reason I like this question is because it's the sort of thing I like to sit around and think about, and then go, "Oh, I wonder if Alex can answer that for me."
Okay, outdated. Look, there has to be a way of deciding who ultimately wins in knockout competitions.
Penalties.
Where there's 2 legs. So could you go straight to penalties? Possibly.
Keep playing
forever.
Yeah.
Until everyone just collapses. I suppose the question is,
take away a player every 2 minutes until
there's just 2 goalkeepers left. Yeah. Okay. Great. That's a good idea.
It's quite a good idea.
It's not a bad idea. I guess the point of this question is the impact of playing at home versus playing away of sufficient disparity still to merit away goals counting for more?
I don't know the answer to that.
People have done stats work on this.
Yes, but before you explain that to me, I saw last week by accident that if away games only counted, Crystal Palace would have been 4th.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, towards the end of a season, there are always these.
No,
tables.
I didn't see. It wasn't the case that someone else found that and then I saw it on Twitter. For some reason, I was looking at the league table and then I did the various different things.
Oh no, I don't mean that you
don't take my achievement and my discovery away from me.
I've literally, definitely seen somebody else say that.
Well, it's probably after they heard me talking about it just now. What's very interesting about that, though, is that that's usually the reverse, right? A team like Crystal Palace, for example, you would expect that if Hodgson's come in and done his job properly, he'll be getting them playing well at home. But to be fourth
because of
away,
counter-attacking. It's because they're set up with Zaha and Townsend.
Didn't think about that.
Particularly to attack in a certain kind of way.
Didn't think about that.
It's the same reason that Wolves got better results against the top 6 than the bottom 6. And I think this is a thing that Jonathan Wilson wrote about persuasively over the weekend, which is that the disparity now between the top clubs and everyone else is enormous. That, in the wake of the FA Cup final, where City beat Watford 6-0, and although there were only 10 places between them in the Premier League, 10 places? Less than that? I don't know. The gulf in class is enormous, and part of the way that he shows this is the number of games has increased enormously, where one side gets 65-70% possession, the other side gets 30%. And so there are teams that are set up better to play counter-attacking football and to play away from home and to wait for teams to come onto them and then try and hit them on the break.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To my mind, that almost plays into a kind of a re-relevance of away goals, to come back to Joseph's question, because what it means is that big teams like Manchester City or whomsoever cannot necessarily go to teams and expect to pass them to death and keep possession all of the time. And that if you're a team who is geared, like Atletico Madrid, for example, a team that's geared to absorb pressure and then through very high caliber players hit teams on the break and score goals, or from set pieces, then it is advantageous to you that the away goals rule counts double. And it allows teams that are maybe smaller, maybe geared to a more counter-attacking style that is different from what a lot of teams are doing, to still have an opportunity to win stuff.
I like it. I'm sure we could talk about that more, but we have to move on because we've talked quite a long time already and we have only done half of the questions.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Flipendo, who is a Tifo YouTube football channel member, incidentally.
Hey,
if you
Flipendo
would like to become a Tifo YouTube channel member like Flipendo is, you can click the join button below our videos. Okay, Flipendo says, which of their many striking options should Chelsea be playing next year, assuming Sarri is still there? Higuain, if bought; Morata, if not sold; Abraham, Batshuayi, Giroud, and which of these most fits Sarri's system? At Napoli, it was Mertens. Is there any chance Sarri finds a similar solution and plays an unorthodox striker next season, which I think he tried to do with Hazard already, didn't he?
He tried to do with Hazard already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's keep this one short.
I think that I would play Abraham or Batshuayi.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he won't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Abraham will be available to buy. probably, for a decent rate, and I would buy him.
Depending upon the transfer issues at Chelsea, right? They might be keen to not let anyone go.
That's true, but maybe they'd also be keen to get money for somebody that they can actually sell, unlike the rest of that lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Hazard, the experiment with Hazard didn't work, not because Hazard didn't do well as a false nine, because he did, but it restricted their ability to attack from where Hazard would normally attack. I mean, they really are massively dependent on that thing.
And I mean, if he leaves in the summer,
they're in a world of trouble. No, I think the short answer to the question is that he will try and play somebody else there, maybe someone like Pedro, possibly even randomly someone like Hudson-Odoi, if they hold on to him. The issue with Sarri is not that bit, though. The issue is the midfield balance, and that's what he needs to address.
Okay. Golden Altaria. Golden Altaria, apologies. What are your thoughts on the Chris Hughton sacking? Do you think that the Seagulls are... sorry. I grew up with Seagulls. Are pushing their luck by canning the man who brought their club to the Premier League, or do you believe that it was the right to make a change? Incidentally, I watched a coach's voice video with is it Graham Potter this morning, who is not officially announced, is he? I don't know.
Not officially, but
it looks that way.
Everybody says that that's what's going to happen.
It was very interesting. I liked the look and the vibe to Graham Potter.
He got his Östersunds players doing ballet.
This was the coach's voice video, which you should go and watch, incidentally.
The coach's voice is a great site. Really, really like it.
And it's just Graham Potter sort of over a tactics board, replaying how he set up his team for a particular game and how a goal happened. And the amount that man talks about space, I enjoyed myself. So, but would you like to answer Golden Altaria's question?
Okay, I think that it's the right thing to do. I think that there isn't room for sentiment in football, and the analogue that everyone has sensibly suggested is when Southampton got rid of Nigel Atkins and replaced him with Pochettino. I think Chris Hughton has done a good job. The issue is that the recruitment that the club focused on, and Brighton actually have a pretty good track record of bringing in interesting players, but they're not players that suit Hughton. So either the club should have thought a season ago, we're going to stick with Hughton hell or high water and we'll buy the sorts of players that work for him. They didn't do that. They started to transition to a more attacking, more inventive style. He wasn't able to keep up with that. One final thing that I would say about this is that I think it's very patronising to talk about what a lovely man he is, and say, oh, it's such a shame that it's happened because he's so nice. Right. He is nice. I'm sure he's very nice, but he's also an excellent professional and a very good manager. He's just not right for the club where they are at the moment. But don't focus on what a good guy he is. Focus on what an excellent job he's done at Brighton.
Okay, Tim, just curious how you guys got into writing and analysing football. I'd love to do the sort of stuff you guys do for a living.
So I got into it when I was doing a different job. I was working in the public sector and started blogging about football because I was bored and wanted to write, and football was something that was fairly accessible. And then I got interested in tactics because it seemed like while there was some good writing about it, there was a disparity between the amount of footage that was suddenly now available and the amount of good tactical writing on it. Plus, I like patterns, and that's just something I've always kind of enjoyed looking for. So my advice really would just be read a lot, watch a lot, and practice writing. I think that's the crucial thing. And obviously there are different styles of writing. If you're writing a scouting report, that's going to be different to writing an article. It's going to be different to writing a script. But writing is probably the skill of that whole skill set which is least valued by the people who do it. And there's some very smart people who really understand football who are garbage at writing. So that's the bit that's actually the thing that you need to practice in order to set yourself apart. Okay. That would be my advice.
I don't really do writing or analysing football, so there's no point in me answering that question. Jordan Anderson, what are the channel's plans for this summer? Women's World Cup, ? Si, senor. We are doing some Women's World Cup videos Nothing too specific on the tournament itself. I think we have something with Richard Laverty, journalist, writing about England's chances ahead of the tournament, a little bit of tactics, that sort of stuff. Another couple of videos are primarily historical, if I remember correctly. We also have a handful of Copa America videos coming out. Again, they will be sort of ahead of the tournament rather than during. Unfortunately, we are a little bit too time limited to be able to do what we did with the World Cup, with the Copa America, which was to be responsive throughout the day. It takes too much time which we don't have. So
there is also going to be a members tactics video on at least one Copa America side, if not more.
So you should become a YouTube football channel Tifo member.
YouTube shift.
Click join.
The
Just to be clear, if you're watching this on the Tifo podcast YouTube channel, don't click join because there won't be one, but go over to the Tifo Football YouTube channel and click join, or don't. I don't care. Jordan Anderson, I've answered your question, Jordan. Stop coming at me. Rogue Apple. Does this lack of quality defenders at the top... I'm getting tired now, you can tell. It's been an hour.
Yeah.
Does the lack of quality defenders at the top of the game come from the increase in competition starting basically from childhood, weaning those with natural intelligence away, or is it simply the after effects of systems coming to rule the land with players required to be less independent? Please bring back podcast videos. Your tired faces give me strength. Hello? In the mornings. Awesome work. Look forward to every video, especially the podcast. Didn't need to read that last bit out, but
just made you feel good.
As I said, I was tired before. Now I'm buoyed.
Yes.
But I am tired enough to not really understand what the question was asking. Do you understand?
I think if we take the element that is most understandable, I think what Rogue Apple is saying is that defending requires a reading of the game and a response to circumstances which becomes harder as play becomes more systematized. And I think that's a very perceptive point, even if the way Rogue Apple has phrased it is slightly complicated. It's certainly a thing that has been talked about a lot in rugby, that as attacks become more practiced and more systematized, it removes the degree of inventiveness that is sometimes required to break down.
Back to Trent Alexander-Arnold.
A defense. Yes, exactly. I think defenders as well are being asked to do more. So I think there is a general move. This is a very broad answer to the question. I think there is a general move towards most players now becoming effectively some sort of utility player. So a fullback is asked to be a defender in the wide space, but also an attacker in the wide space. A central defender is asked to defend the central space, but also bring the ball forwards and start attacks. Goalkeepers is an obvious example as well. Does that mean that they become less kind of core skilled around defense? Yes, probably some of them do. I think it's really interesting that, for example, in the English game, there hasn't been a defender, in my opinion, of someone like Rio Ferdinand's stature since Rio Ferdinand. And
in the English game, as in with English players or in the Premier League?
Sorry, with English players. I also don't think there's necessarily been that sort of... I think if Rio Ferdinand came through football now, he would be a Fernandinho. I think he would play in that sort of sixth position, where his ability to read the game and also to pass and carry the ball.
What about John Stones, though? John
useful.
Stones isn't that, but he could do those things.
He could do those things. I still think John Stones is prone to mistakes in a way that Ferdinand was much less so.
Okay.
And I think it's really interesting that as City accelerated towards the end of the season, we saw Vincent Kompany come back in.
Yep.
And alongside Laporte and not John Stones.
Captain Kompany.
Right.
There's
a great example of a leader.
Good,
so
it's good.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, Rogue Apple. I think that, in short, the answer is that defenders are being asked to defend less and do other stuff more, and that means that by default they're not going to be as pure in terms of defending ability, perhaps, as they were. I don't think it's to do with intelligence. I think footballers are generally more intelligent than they were before, or in terms of their reading of the game, their understanding of systems and tactics. That has become more complex, and therefore they have to be more aware of that and intelligent to understand those things. But I also think there's a general trend towards utility players. So that again probably is my answer to the question.
Okay.
But it's thought-provoking and probably should take longer than just 5 minutes.
Well, would that it were.
Would that it were.
Thank you, Rogue Apple, and to all of our other question submitters. Apologies if you asked a question that we didn't get to. There was a large number of high-quality questions.
High quality.
But we are already over an hour now, and we don't have time. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As I said earlier, next week I will be chatting to Seb about travelling to away games in faraway lands and difficulties with that.
What's the furthest you've ever been for a football match?
Enfield. No, Norwich. No, probably Old Trafford.
Okay.
I've been to Scotland. I haven't watched any football in Scotland, though.
Right.
I don't like to leave the country. I like it here.
Yes.
And I don't like these other places. I don't like them. Get away from me. No, listen, I just want everything to be perfect for me. And if I can't travel to Baku, even though I had no intention of doing so, I'm upset by that because I want to be able to do everything possible. It is an upsetting thing. I don't know what I'm talking about. I haven't spoken to Seb yet. I am not the authority.
It'll be great, though. It'll be a great podcast.
It will be good, yeah. So tune into that. And then over the summer, I would like to say that we are going to do some videos related to transfers, but not in a gossipy way. We're not going to be saying, is Frank Lampard going to, hell? No, we're not doing that. We won't be doing that. We'll be saying, here's a club like Chelsea. Well, Chelsea's a terrible example because they've got a transfer ban. God, I've really cocked this up. Here's a club, Manchester United.
Manchester United.
Who would it be sensible for them to buy?
Yeah.
Who would it and to lose? Not who are they going to buy or who, because we know if they buy someone, it won't be sensible. But who would it be sensible for them to buy? And we'll be doing that. We might sort of rope those into some podcasts as well. So let us know if you have any thoughts or if there's anything you would like to hear in particular. And thank you very much for listening. Back with you next week.